Buried beneath the Nutley Parks and Rec soccer field are memories of one of the largest cycling stadiums in the United States. In the 1930s, the sport of cycling made one last effort to keep it from fading away, only to have it end in tragedy. Ambition, hope, and despair. This is the story of the Nutley Velodrome.
A velodrome, it's a bit of a dated term, I suppose. I guess it's a European word. Velo meaning speed, drome meaning a stadium.
A velodrome is a racetrack for bicyclists. It's usually oval, and on average, they're about 1/6 of a mile long.
Cycling in those days, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, was a spectator sport. Spectator sports were basically baseball, cycling, and boxing. So it had a big place in American sports back in those days. People would come to the velodrome on Wednesday nights and Sunday afternoons, and they would watch all different type of bicycle races, sprints and distant races and relays and things like that.
They did a lot of motor-paced racing in which a motorcycle would ride in front of the bicyclist, and the motorcycle on the back would have a fork with a sort of ball-bearing spinning rod on it. This way, if the bicyclist actually touched the motorcyclist, he wouldn't flip over. But the idea was for the motorcyclist to go ahead of the bicycle to act sort of as a windbreak.
A group of businessmen decided that there was money to be made on presenting the sport as a business venture. They built the Newark Velodrome. Now this was the spot. The Newark Velodrome, from 1911 on, it was always big news in the newspapers, in the New York Times, and especially in the Newark Evening News. It was either front page news or it was always leading off the sports section. The best bicycle riders from Europe, from Australia, from New Zealand, from South America, all came to Newark to race at the Newark Velodrome. This is where you would race against the best, and this is where all the big prize money was. The Newark Velodrome was very successful for many, many years, but the sport started to wane. It started to lose its popularity. The people that ran the bicycle tracks, they didn't really keep up. They didn't invest in the sport. They didn't bring up new young bike riders. So the sport started to really, it started to fade out. The lease for the Newark Velodrome came up in 1930. They decided to close the track. 3 years later, a man by the name of Joseph Mealy, who was a very successful businessman, he was a big cycling fan, and he wanted to bring back the sport. He felt that there was still life to the sport, and thought he could make a profit at it. So he owned property in Nutley.
And it was proposed to build a velodrome in Nutley. There was some initial resistance to it because some people wanted a park to go there.
They didn't want big crowds down in that part of Nutley. They were afraid of all the noise, and it was going to generate trash. Keep in mind now, 1933, we're in the middle of the Great Depression. So people wanted to do anything they could to maybe generate some business. The people who owned the track prevailed.
The Nutley Velodrome track was pretty unique in that it was a board track constructed completely of wood. It had a 45-degree bank to it. It was only 1/7 of a mile long, which is a little smaller than most velodromes. And it was built on top of an old quarry, so it could not be built with any type of permanent foundation because the quarry, which had been used for landfill for decades after the quarry was closed, that landfill would move around too much, and the velodrome had to actually be shimmed up on occasion to keep it from sinking into the landfill.
He opened the Nutley Velodrome on June the 4th, 1933, and all the best bike riders of the day turned out for the opening event. And 12,000 people showed up and paid ticket prices to get in. And then after a while, it became pretty popular within Nutley, but also the surrounding areas. There were still a lot of bicycle fans who would drive to Nutley on a Wednesday night or Sunday afternoon and come to watch the bike races. So it looked like he was onto something. He was determined. He was going to have the sport rebound.
We would have bicyclists from all over the country and all over the world. Many famous bicyclists from Germany, France, England would come to Nutley to race in the Nutley Velodrome.
Some of the famous riders at the Nutley Velodrome back in those days, Torchy Peden was a very famous Canadian bike rider. Franco Giorgetti was an Italian world champion. He raced at the Nutley Velodrome. Mr. Letourneau, who was from France, a big champion. People like that, they still had some name recognition, and they still drew crowds because people admired them. They were like sports heroes at the time. But after 1935, much like the decline of the sport at the Newark Velodrome, attendance started to dip and drag.
Unfortunately, it was built at the time where bicycle racing was sort of at the end of its peak. So the Nutley Velodrome only had 3 or 4 good years to it before bicycle races declined and the velodrome started to lose popularity.
The big problem came up, I think it was 1937. Basically, the bike riders said, look, either you pay us or we're not going to ride anymore. Maybe Mr. Mealy thought that if you could just kind of wait it out and survive, maybe sooner or later the sport of cycling would come back. But in the meantime, they scheduled 4 boxing matches at the velodrome, and those, I guess, drew a couple thousand people.
And then at 1938, I believe, they introduced the miniature car racing, doodle bugs, which was a midget car, but very powerful.
Midget car racing was a big sport, usually on dirt tracks, but on a banked wooden track in Nutley, you had to be a daredevil to go on there. The first night they had car racing at the velodrome, they got like 8,000 people. So all of a sudden they said, oh, now we've got something going here. But then the accidents started happening, and then 3 guys died on the track.
It really wasn't able to accommodate these doodle bugs or race cars too well. So there were many, many accidents because the track was very small, had a very high embankment, and these cars, although very small, were very powerful.
The second death that's the one that everybody remembers. He caught the fence that was overhanging that they didn't realize was going to be dangerous.
Former Commissioner Frank Cacciola, when he was a young teenager, used to park cars at the velodrome, and he was there the night of the second death at the velodrome, the famous Henry Garand decapitation. He would say that the velodrome was always noisy, no matter what was going on, but that night there was an eerie silence that had come over the crowd right after the accident, and he knew then and there that that was a very, very bad accident, and unlike anything that the velodrome had ever seen before.
And then there was one more death after that, another very fatal crash and very tragic. And so it was shut down pretty quickly after that. So, and then they tried to bring cycling back one more time, didn't work. The last bicycle race at the Nutley Velodrome was in September 1940. And I can kind of picture the scene. There's only maybe a couple hundred people there. They closed the gates, and that was, to me, that was the end of the golden age of bicycle racing in the United States. After the Nutley Velodrome shut down, the track just sat there for a couple of years. I didn't spot any other news stories about it. Basically, I guess it was no longer worthy of news coverage, and the track was kind of dead.
And then in 1942, when the World War II was going on, steel was needed for war efforts, so the owner of the velodrome actually dismantled it and took all the steel out of it and scrapped it for wartime use. So after the velodrome came down, it was decided to put a park there, and it's currently where the soccer field is, right by the Parks and Rec building on 44 Park Avenue in Nutley.
When the velodrome era closed for cycling, the era of road racing began, and that really started, by and large, with the Tour of Somerville in 1940. That was really the start of really re-energizing the sport of cycling in New Jersey and then elsewhere. We started to redevelop world-class bicycle racers. And now we have things like the Tour de France, and we have Olympic cycling. Cycling now is a major global sport, and you can see that in all the magazines that cover the sport. And cycling, the bikes that they build now are like aerospace quality, and they brand new materials. So and that all really kind of started here in New Jersey with the velodromes. When I used to go to the barber shop, people would talk about, oh, back in the days when we were at the Nutley Velodrome, and I was like, Nutley Velodrome, what the heck is that? So I didn't know what it was. But then as I researched it, I started seeing there was a story there. Good memories that people have about growing up in their community, about the sport, if you're interested in the sport of cycling, about the town itself, about why things occurred the way they did. The memories are really what count. And then as the memories fade, well, then it becomes part of history.
Even though cycling has grown larger over the decades, There's still something special about the era of velodromes that could only be grasped in the moment. Even though it's long gone, the memories of the Nutley Velodrome still live on, buried underneath the soccer field, waiting to be rediscovered.